I consider myself a de-occultist. I'm no longer an occultist. I'm a de-occultist. I'm attempting to take this information out of hiding. It's been hidden. The hiding of it is destroying the fabric of our society and putting us into bondage. It needs to come out and be non-hidden. It needs to be unveiled and shared widely and freely with anybody who's capable of accepting it and comprehending it now. Because we're not in a position where we could wait longer. We're at the precipice. Okay? There is a moral obligation to bring this information to the public now. Okay? So, I consider myself a de-occultist. One who takes things out of hiding and presents them openly. These are the 7 general principles of natural law. Sovereign means above or beyond externally imposed rulership or control by another. That's what it means. Sovereign means not a subject to another being, like a king, like one who considers himself a king. And it means not a slave to someone who considers themselves your master. That's all sovereign means, folks. Not a slave. And why I say every single person here is a sovereign is because there is no such thing, never has been any such thing, and never will be any such thing as legitimacy to slavery.
In the age of COVID, the organized loneliness manifested itself in lockdowns, masking, and social distancing, and the exclusion of the unvaccinated. The Alone Together public service announcement produced and circulated by the Ad Council in March of 2020 represented this organized loneliness succinctly. They actually ran an ad called Alone Together. Together we're alone, basically. I don't want to make you feel hopeless and helpless and hapless in the face of all this. So I have a 9-point plan to stop it. We call this phenomenon of corporate legal monopoly and market control acquired by using political influence by the name of corporate socialism. So that's what you say to people when they say, well, this isn't socialism, it's being run by a bunch of capitalists. No, this is being run by a bunch of monopolists. That's why it is socialist. What is socialism if not a monopoly system? These are monopolists who want to monopolize the economy. They use the ESG as a demarcation device in order to drive out all the competition and exclude them from the marketplace and retain complete and total control over the rest of the economy. And it does this to the detriment. Speaking of what it does to small business, it's aimed at destroying it. As more and more investors choose to tilt their investments toward sustainability-focused companies, the tectonic shift we are seeing will accelerate further. And because this will have such a dramatic impact on how capital is allocated, every management team and board will need to consider how this will impact their company's stock. Translation, if you don't get on board with the sustainability, ESG, stakeholder regime, you're going to be starved of capital and die on the vine.
The way that I like to say this is the default. You have to understand when I say that one world global technocracy backed by energy credits, this isn't a theory, and it's not a conspiracy theory. They're actively building it. MasterCard has already built this out. They're working with WF partner companies. This has been the goal of technocracy since the 1930s. And they have built a lot of this technical infrastructure. So what we have to understand is we're not going back to pre-COVID. Unless we actively come up with an alternative, that is the default. And no one that I've talked to has heard of Regulated Liability Network. And I've been all over the place. I have not found one single person that's heard of it. And by the way, you can Google it. They have a white paper. It's boring. It's incredibly boring. But when you read it, it's, they talk about the threats of cryptocurrency and how we need to protect the stability of central banks and how we have to integrate digital. I mean, it's very dystopian. There are quotes that I'm going to pull out of there because they have pull quotes in this white paper that you're like, wow, they're confessing. You know what I mean? It's kind of like you wouldn't think that they would put that in writing, but it's very overt in the Regulated Liability Network what they're planning on doing, and they are building it. And this is the challenge, because the way that I like Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Aaron Day Show, episode number 12. This is going to be a really exciting show. I've been looking forward to this for a couple of weeks, actually. Tonight, we are going to talk about the digital cage, how globalists plan to enslave humanity. And we have two terrific guests. We have Mark Passio and Dr. Michael Rectenwald. And so it's going to be a phenomenal show. Before I jump into that, though, I want to go through a few things from last week, and then also, make sure I address the endorsement that I made and kind of put some context around that so that it makes a little bit of sense. So as you all know, I've been saying forever that we can't vote our way out. And the whole basis of what I have been doing for the past couple of years has been to actually try to encourage others and show people how I use alternative currency as a way to ditch the dollar and get out of the current system. And so while I did run for office to raise awareness of the issue, I've been very, against voting. However, there is an exception. You may notice that I made an endorsement of Trump yesterday. And before you, scream or wonder if something has happened to me, there's a very specific reason. I still don't endorse any of these policies. And I don't even understand what the political principles are for either of the candidates. And so it's not that I've had to change an opinion or even lesser of two evils. I truly believe that the right strategy is to exit and build. The problem that we have is that some of the best freedom fighters that we have are in prison or in exile, and you can't exit and build from in a cage. And so the best outcome I think that we could shoot for, and this is something that's actively under consideration, is a pardon of these five men: Roger Ver, Ian Freeman, Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, and Ross Ulbricht. So that is the sole reason that I endorse Trump. I don't have any expectations of anything else. That is the entirety of the reason. And, might he, rug on that? Sure, it's possible, but this is our A team. We need these guys back. And so that is the singular reason that I did that. And so I wanted to address that up front. And also to say, I'm going to be talking about this before the election and going on a few podcasts to explain the rationale and to walk through that. So I do want to say, again, this is all about these five activists. And so I'm going to encourage you for the first three that they have a website. They're actively collecting signatures for a petition for a pardon. And these signatures work. I mean, you might say, oh, this is useless. But, Lynn Ulbricht has actually been successful in getting 600,000 signatures for Ross. And that is one of the main reasons that Trump at least said that he would commute his sentence on day one. So there's a website, freerogernow.org, where you can sign a petition. There's another one for Ian Freeman at freeiannow.org. And then the petition is still up, if you haven't signed it already, for Ross Ulbricht at freeross.org. And so again, hopefully this will work. We'll see. But, I'm not, my opinion has not changed on whether or not we can vote our way out. However, sadly, the only way these people can get out of a cage at this point is through a pardon. So, my goal on this is I would love to see all five of these guys live at Free Men at PorcFest. So that's kind of what I'm aiming for. And I'll be on a couple of shows for sure talking about this topic. I'll be on Free Talk Live on Saturday at 7:00, and then I will be on Liberty Speaks the following Friday. So that pretty much concludes I'm not going to go through any of the normal stuff that I go through at the intro because I want to get to the heart of the matter. This is a really important show because if you've been following me at all, either on this podcast or in person or whatever, I've written this book, The Final Countdown, and my entire life has been dedicated to stopping CBDCs. Why? Because programmable digital currency is basically the gateway to absolute digital tyranny. Once they can control and program your money, it's over. Then social credit systems and everything else, which I'm sure we're going to talk about tonight. And in the first chapter of my book, I lay out what a future scenario might look like under Agenda 2030. But I'm actually going to rewrite my book, and I actually want to spend more time talking about Agenda 2030 and then maybe even Agenda 2045, because if people don't understand what's going on, who's behind it, and why, everything will be confusing to them and nothing will make sense. So they'll continue to think it's a fluke or just a few bad apples. And in reality, this is a very coordinated strategy, what's going on. And the best way I can summarize it is the stakes here are free will versus determinism, decentralization versus centralization, abundance versus manufactured scarcity, and love versus fear. Those are really the dimensions of this battle. And so today I have two phenomenal guests who actually know more about this subject than I do, but come at it from two completely different perspectives, which I think is going to give us a really interesting conversation. Joining us is Mark Passio, a fearless freedom fighter and influential voice in the realms of metaphysics, spirituality, and natural law. Known for his groundbreaking lecture series, What on Earth is Happening, Mark has spent years exposing the hidden truths about societal control and advocating for true individual freedom. His deep dive into natural law, universal moral principles that govern human behavior, has resonated with thousands seeking to break free from manipulation and mind control. Mark has fought tirelessly against the suppression of knowledge, delving into controversial topics like the occult and societal mind control. His teachings include the natural law, the real law of attraction, offer a powerful roadmap for those striving to live authentically in a world of increasing authoritarianism. As the founder of One Great Work Network, Mark continues to inspire and awaken individuals globally, proving that knowledge is the key to liberation. Mark's work stands as a beacon of hope for those fighting for sovereignty, critical thinking, and truth in the face of systemic oppression. We also have Michael Rectenwald, who is a true freedom fighter who's battled against the forces of censorship and authoritarianism throughout his career. Michael, a former NYU professor, rose to prominence after taking a courageous stand against the growing authoritarian tendencies in academia and social justice movements. His outspoken criticism led to backlash and forced him into early retirement, but he emerged stronger, becoming a leading advocate for liberty and free speech. Michael has authored numerous books, 12 in total, including Springtime for Snowflakes and his latest work, The Great Reset and the Struggle for Liberty, which takes a hard-hitting look at the global technocratic plans for control, sounding the alarm about the threats to freedom we all face. Michael's fearless advocacy, including his 2024 run for the Libertarian presidential nomination, proves that he's not afraid to stand up, even when facing personal and professional challenges. He's a champion of free speech, individual liberty, and a tireless critic of collectivism and global control agendas. Plus, as I understand it, he will soon be moving to the free state of New Hampshire. So to frame this, Mark and Michael take two completely different approaches. Mark takes an esoteric approach. He looks at the hidden spiritual and metaphysical knowledge that's often reserved for a select few and has an interesting background on this. So his work is on natural law and the occult, whereas Michael engages more with the exoteric, the outward social and political structures that are accessible and influence the wider population. So these are two completely different approaches. And so I think it's going to be an interesting conversation to talk about Agenda 2030 and Agenda 2045 from both the esoteric and the exoteric perspective. So with that, I'm going to bring these guys on and we will get right to it. Hi, Mark. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Aaron, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm doing well today. I'm looking forward to this great conversation.
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Aaron. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be very interesting. Mark and I have spoken before. I find him very fascinating, and I'm really interested in what's going to happen tonight.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I have some notes here, but I didn't want to make it too structured because I figured it would probably take a natural life of its own. But I mean, as I've actually been preparing for this and even promoting the show, a lot of people, some people have said, well, what's Agenda 2030? And most people have not heard of Agenda 2045. So I guess, how would you each summarize what those are?
I guess I could speak to that a little bit. They are plans for the future of humanity as laid out by the social engineer and ruling class for what I would call complete full spectrum dominance over human life. And I would even extend that and say it is abject slavery that they are actually planning. They want to move from a place of covert slavery, which they have already actually established in our society, to a place of overt slavery, by which the slavery is completely in our face and actually seen and recognized, yet they are recognized as the rulers and controllers of humanity, and they can step into that role unchallenged. I would call it full spectrum slavery and full spectrum eugenics in every aspect of human life. That would be my summary for it.
Yeah, I mean, Agenda 2030 is a complete plan for the absolute registration and control of all living things, including not only human beings, but other species, and the complete digitalization of all of the resources on planet Earth, and inclusive of human beings vis-a-vis many technologies, but also ideology. And of course, it also involves a complete change of the economy into what they call stakeholder capitalism, which is nothing like capitalism. It's nothing like the free market whatsoever. It is a complete centralized control economy. And they are rationalizing it through a lot of euphemistic nonsense. That's the key to breaking the code, is to realize what these words actually mean. They use all kinds of code words, which I think some of which should be alarming to begin with, but the equity and inclusion and sustainability, of course, are some of the key terms that they use. And I can talk about what all these things mean. But I've broken down Agenda 2030 and translated the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals.
I believe mics were inadvertently muted there. Aaron and Michael's mics are muted somehow.
I have no idea how that happened.
Aaron, you were just unmuted, but Michael is still somehow muted.
It actually says Michael's mic isn't connected. Is there any way that it got disconnected somehow? Still nothing. It still says can't unmute your guest. Their mic isn't connected. That was weird. It cut out right in the middle, and nothing happened. I didn't.
Aaron, both yours and Michael's were suddenly muted simultaneously for some reason.
Well, they will talk about who they are. Probably don't want us to have this conversation. Let me. Michael, do you want to try exiting and jumping back in and see if that fixes it? Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, hopefully Michael can get his tech issues resolved there.
All right, let's see here. Yeah, if Dan says the Matrix is attacking, it looks like.
I'm no stranger to tech issues. I understand how that goes.
Yeah, me too. I've been having more of them, which is unfortunate. Okay, here we go. There he is. Seems to have a. It's not muted. Let's see, are you there?
Yes.
Okay, great.
I don't know what happened. I didn't do anything. But okay, I was saying that I've translated Agenda 2030's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Everything is put in this terminology like eradicate poverty, educate the whole world, have gender equality. But all of these things are code. Underneath of it all is a centralized planning and eugenics, because one of the things about gender equality is it's really a means of reducing the birth rate dramatically by virtue of making careerism and so-called, women's health into a means for diminishing the population. So there is a definite eugenics program to it. There's the fourth industrial revolution aspect, which includes all the technologies that we'll probably talk about tonight, digital identity, CBDC, the Internet of Bodies, the Internet of Things, all of these ways of completely tracking and tracing and digitalizing everything on Earth to include them in a circle which is inescapable, really. And that's really what inclusion means, is a totalitarian regime. But anyway, we could talk about all this further.
So here's a question. You guys both said they. Who is they? Or who are they?
I would say that the people directing this agenda are a ruling class that is constituted of occultists, people who hold and wield hidden knowledge in a way that allows them to manipulate the perceptions of the general population at large. So it is not entirely composed of master occultists, people who really deeply understand the human psyche and who have studied it their entire lives and whose family bloodlines contain the deep-seated knowledge of human psychology for countless generations and have basically passed it within their family bloodlines down to the current generations of the control class. But it also includes their order followers and lackeys who will do their bidding for a paycheck and simply say, yeah, I'll do what you want me to do, even if it's immoral, even if it involves completely subjugating and enslaving the population. As long as I get my pay, I get what's mine coming to me, and I get fed to the big beast last. Those order followers and lackeys would have to be included in also who they are, whether they are doing that wittingly or unwittingly. They would be included in the people who are bringing this nightmarish dystopian society to fruition. So it's not only the control class, it's not only the actual social engineers, it's also their order followers and those who carry out their bidding for them.
And keeping with your introduction of me, I would say there are some identifiable characters involved. They are the ruling class, and they are, a technocratic ruling class. But they're inclusive of the state, because what they do is they enlist the state in this, of course, forcing legislation into national, regional, and local government. And also, they are massive financial players, inclusive of the central banks, of course, but also major financial players like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, UBS, and other financial asset managers who are instituting this kind of stakeholder capitalism regime. So they can, I really appreciate Mark's knowledge about their esoteric knowledge. I don't know that part of it. I have tried to track who these people actually are and what they do. You can look at the board of directors of the WEF, and I'm not saying the WEF. I look at the WEF as like a clearinghouse for these people. It is not the central hub of power. It is a clearinghouse where they share and collect and cooperate to undertake these things. Of course, the UN is deeply involved. They, of course, are the agency that issues Agenda 2030 and Vision 2045. And they are the executive body. But they drive this into the social fabric through many means, including through economics, through technology. They enlist many corporate players especially in the technology, on the technology end. They bring them in to execute a lot of these plans. And for example, Microsoft is all over Vision 2045. And many other technology companies like Google's very, very much involved. They will be issuing digital identity very shortly. And many other technology companies that are drafted, as it were, to execute all this. So that's how I would identify the they. It is, they are certainly not making themselves entirely known, but there are tracks and traces with breadcrumbs we can follow to see exactly who they are and what they're up to.
Well, I was going to say, so what I found, at least my research, and I think maybe Mark, you might have a missing piece that goes back much, much further. But to me, there seems to be kind of these shadowy organizations, the Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, Club of Rome, Bilderberg Group, that are kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes. I actually reached out to Patrick Wood. He sent me his list. He's been building a database of the Trilateral Commission for like 40 years, and he actually sent it to me. And he's been tracking it over time. So lo and behold, Larry Fink is on there. You have Jamie Dimon from Chase used to be on there. I think they serve, 3 or 4 year terms. And he's actually even tracked how long these individuals have been on the board. He has an analysis of the breakdown. It's like half are from multinational corporations, and then you have a percentage from academia and a percentage from the political class, and then a percentage from the media. It's a really well done breakdown. And there's really, by the way, this is an interesting thing about AI. Before they started putting on the layers of censorship, you could actually pull some interesting information out. Like, for instance, I wanted to find who's been on the board of directors of all 4 of those companies. You can't actually query that and get a response now. There's actually somebody from the Carnegie Foundation, of all things, that was on the board of all 4 of those, call it shadow organizations. And then I look at the UN, the WEF, the Bank of International Settlements, IMF, World Bank, if I didn't mention those guys. Those 5 organizations are really the front face. But I look at that as more the behind the scenes guys leveraging the state and leveraging taxpayers for additional funding for their private investments. That's kind of my mental outlook on that. And those 5 organizations have an annual budget of $30 billion and employ 65,000 people. And when you look at the WEF, the top 10 WEF partner companies employ have a combined market cap of $9 trillion, employ 6 million people, and have almost $2 trillion of cash on hand. So it's huge what we're up against. And the challenge that I have, and I don't know if you guys have this as well, is that, well, you start talking about, they're moving towards a one world government. You start talking about eugenics, and people automatically shut it off and say, well, this is a conspiracy theory. This even happens in libertarian circles, when in reality, it's not like we're using, secondary or further out sources. They're the actual direct sources of this information. They don't even hide it. I think, Mark, to your point, they're actually kind of coming out, and they're being blatant about it at this point, because they don't think they can be stopped. But that's about as far as I've gotten. But from a bloodline perspective, I mean, how far back does this go? How,
I would say that this goes back into human antiquity. We have always been a slave race. That's very difficult for some people to accept from a worldview perspective. But what you really have to do is understand what's being done on this earth is it's human farming. And you have to look at the control class. You have to look at the ruling class of master manipulators, of mind controllers, as human farmers. These are people who are running a farm. So think about what a traditional animal farm does for the farming family. It provides them with the resources that they need. It provides them with the food that they are going to eat. It provides them, if they have a surplus, obviously they can sell it and make money and continue with their family lineage down to future generations. Indefinitely, if the farm is run well, or the complex of farms, as it were run efficiently. And that's really all nation states are. That's what the whole world is. It's a complex of human farms. And think about it. They want the farm to be managed sustainably, because if you have too many population of animals on any given farm, regardless of what kind of animal you happen to be farming, it's going to make the farm completely run down and polluted, and you're not going to be able to continue to run that farm efficiently. It's not going to last more than a couple of generations. So they want efficiency on the farm. They want as small and manageable of a population as possible to be able to do the work that they want the human livestock to do, and they want to breed them in such a way that they take on the mindset that the ruling class wants the livestock to take on. That makes them far more easily managed, with far less resources needing to be dedicated to their management. That is really the situation that human beings are in right now, whether they know it or not.
I would, I would say that's a very good metaphor. It's actually more than a metaphor. It's probably a very good illustration of what's going on. In terms of those groups that you referred to, I totally agree, and I have a whole chapter written on the roundtable groups that came out of the Cecil Rhodes and the Cecil Rhodes roundtables, and that includes, of course, the Council on Foreign Relations, the RIIA, Royal Institute of International Affairs, or the Chatham House Group. Of course, the Club of Rome, where a lot of the eugenics thinking and climate catastrophism first originated, and then naturally the World Economic Forum is just one of these roundtable groups, and then the Trilateral Commission, which was founded 2 years after the WF, is another one of these roundtable groups, and that roundtable group acts on the Chatham. They operate under the Chatham House rules of secrecy, and that's been the rule since the RIIA was established, and it goes back even into the older roundtable groups established by Cecil Rhodes. So, then you can look at those groups as kind of like, look, I look at the state, I look at these organizations. These are the tools or the weapons in the ruling class's hands. The state is nothing but a weapon that the ruling class uses. You have to find the ruling class itself, and they're pretty much showing their hand in many cases now. I think they wrap in various organizations as basically a kind of tools that they operate with. I do think that even though the ruling class exists and is not separate from the state, but they are the ones that occupy it and control it, that taking away their weapons is the first step. Taking away their tools is one of the first steps to defang their power. And I think Mark will talk about the spiritual tools that they operate under. And spiritual, I know, having talked to Mark, is not necessarily metaphysical. We're talking about psychological tools, if I'm right, and this is a very interesting part of it. Is just, what are these tools? What are the techniques, the techne that they operate under or use to wield power over us?
So Mark, you actually have a direct experience with this, right? You kind of came over from the dark side. You want to talk about that a bit? Because I think that's the part people are clearly the least familiar with, and it's probably the most impactful.
Right. So I have a background in the occult world. I've been directly connected with dark occult organizations in my youth, in my past. And, it's a very difficult thing for people who haven't been involved in any aspect of occultism to understand. It probably involves 1/100th of 1% of the population, if not less than that. So most people have zero framework to deal with regarding anything having to do with occultism, and they're afraid of the word. They've been conditioned by religion, they've been conditioned by society to hear the word occult and just think of that as, oh, that's just some quaint religious belief that involves, devil worship or, manipulation of spirits or whatever. And they just have no idea what it really is. And again, as I said, the word occult just means hidden. It means hidden from the average person's view. It's difficult to see because it's been veiled and it has been confused in people's minds. But what it really is it's knowledge about how things really work. It's knowledge about how the human mind works and how it can be deceived, how it can be manipulated, how it could be improved even. That's all included in the body of knowledge that I would refer to as occultism, because it's not just one thing. It's not just bad. It's not just evil. It can be used for the uplift of human consciousness if it's used correctly. And if it's used for manipulation and control, it can be used to destroy people, because it's the knowledge of how the natural world actually works and the rules that govern the natural world, the actual laws that govern the natural world, and that have been hidden from people since time immemorial to keep them ignorant and therefore more easily controlled. And it also, as I said, includes the knowledge of the human psyche and how it works. And these people know more about how human beings work inside their minds than people know about themselves. They have more knowledge of us than we do ourselves, for those of us who don't study deep psychology. I always give people very simple examples of what the occult really is. It's a manipulation game. The dark occult is a manipulation game that if somebody knows more about the human psyche than someone else, they can basically put them on their leash. You look into how politics works. When Obama was on the campaign trail, every single solitary place that he went, there was a plant in the audience. It was a woman who was a member of his campaign organization, and she would pretend to faint in the audience. And he would recognize it happening suddenly. And then he'd say, just make some space for her. You can look this up. It's a video that's online. It's called Obama's Fainting Ladies. They've done a nice job scrubbing it. But this is what occult manipulation through hidden psychology really is. And, he offers her his water. He assures the crowd that she's going to be okay. And, I say, doesn't he know that she had a massive aneurysm and is actively dying? Suddenly he's a doctor, right? But it's like the crowd buys into it. And what ideas does that plant into the crowd? Well, he's the most attentive man in the audience because he sees it happen before anybody else does. He's the most knowledgeable man because he knows it's just her getting faint and needing some space and some air. Then he's the most caring person because here, offer her my water. It's a complete and utter staged thing that is just there to play on the emotions and tug on the heartstrings of the people. And they're gullible enough to fall for it because they don't understand how psychopaths operate. And that's really what the whole game is it's psychopaths playing off of other people's emotions who don't know enough about themselves and their own psychology. And they're basically just fools led to the slaughter. To just briefly recount my background, I was involved in dark occult organizations. I became involved with an organization in the west coast of the United States known as the Church of Satan, now centered in New York. Back then, the high priest of the organization was Anton LaVey, who began the organization. He died 1 year after appointing me to the rank of regular priest. People always hear my background story and they say Passio claims he was a high priest. I never said the word high. As I've said many times, the only people who think I was ever a high priest in the Church of Satan were high themselves. The answer is I was one step above the member. The bottom line rank and file member. One step above that is regular priest. He offered me to head a grotto in my tri-state area in Philadelphia. I used to live in Philadelphia. I now live in southeastern Pennsylvania. But I turned down the offer of heading a grotto, which is what they call their covens in this branch of Satanism. And I said I didn't want that responsibility. So he just basically said, well, here's some contacts and you can get involved with other people in your tri-state area. And that's what I did. I then attended meetings and rituals of Satanists and their grottos in the southeastern Pennsylvania, the Delaware, and the northern Maryland area, in that tri-state area. This was back in the 1990s, in the mid 90s into the late 90s. And I saw that people from every single avenue of human society and human institutions, from banking to military to politics to law enforcement, judiciary, public education, medicine, entertainment, everything. There were people who had the worldview of dark occultism and Satanism involved at very high level positions of worldly power in every one of those institutions that attended these homes and meetings and rituals. And that's what opened up my eyes, that this is a tight-knit unit. It's not just people looking for individual improvement over their own mentality and to gain knowledge for themselves so they can get a leg up in life. It was a very tight-knit network working together all over the entire world. Again, they had people in point positions of power in every worldly institution, and they were all working toward the same end goals. And that was to increase their worldly power at the expense of everyone else's freedom. They wanted to become the gods of this world. They want to become the rulers of everyone else and put everybody into bondage and slavery. And I didn't want any part of that. That wasn't my intent going into the world of the occult. Again, as I said, it was egotistical. It was for my own self-benefit, but never to enslave humanity. And when I understood that that's really the goal that these Satanists were working toward, and that they were embedded all over the world in every institution, I pulled back, and my conscience would not allow me to proceed any further. And people think that, it's like a mafia and you're not going to be let out of it. And they just looked at me like, okay, boy, out you go. Don't let the door hit you on the ass on the way out. We don't need you. You need us. You think we need you? It was that cavalier, and that just so what? It's not what people think it is, getting out, if you're not all the way in. See, I wasn't all the way in, knowing where the bodies are buried, quote unquote. I didn't have that level knowledge of their day-to-day activities. So at that point, they just let you walk if you want. And they say, yeah, do your worst. Go tell anybody what you think you saw and what you understand. And, so it's different than people believe it to be. They want you to give of your own free will to be involved to the extent that you want to be involved. And when I said, I don't want anything to do with this from a conscience perspective, they just said, well, go your own way and do what you're going to do, and we'll be over here doing what we're going to do. And they don't just talk. They're very on point and very driven and very knowledgeable and have tons and tons of skill sets and people at their disposal with tons of skill sets to get done what they say they're going to get done. In the freedom movement, it's like herding cats. It's like everybody wants to do their own thing. Nobody's on the same page ideologically or philosophically, and we can't even get people together to accomplish small goals. They're on point and together, like operating like one mind to achieve huge goals. And they don't just talk about it, they get it done. And that's what we need to start doing.
How'd you get recruited in the first place?
That's a great question.
How does recruitment in general work?
Well, there is some direct recruiting in the world of dark occultism and Satanism. And that is sort of how it worked for me. I didn't really seek out the appointment. I became a regular rank and file member in the Church of Satan in the early 1990s. And I espoused the ideology through writing and music. I wrote for underground magazines called fanzines, which were popular at the time in music stores and art shops and things like that. And I basically had, like small articles that I would write on the satanic ideology that I would get published in these fanzine, magazines. And then I also had a band. I had a death metal band that espoused the satanic ideology. We were known as Insanity, the word insanity with the word Satan embedded in the middle. We really kind of sort of like pioneered the East Coast death metal sound. And I was the lead vocalist and lyricist. So I injected a lot of the satanic ideology into the lyrics of the band. And, within a couple years, Anton LaVey wrote to me. I did not seek out an appointment for a priesthood within the Church of Satan. Anton LaVey wrote a letter to me asking me, or just basically appointing me as a priest in the Church of Satan, and then asking me if I would head a grotto in my region of the country, because they said they wanted more grottos in the Philadelphia area. So he appointed me priest without any prompting on my behalf, simply by when you join, you fill out an extensive psychological profile in the form of many essay questions that you have to answer. They ask you everything about your worldview and your psychology and your upbringing and your views of life and tastes and preferences, you name it. It's a profile that goes very deep psychologically. So they vet you in a way to see if you're willing, from a mindset perspective, to go further. And if you are, then they start grooming you. And the organization that they continuously talked about when I attended these meetings was the Club of Rome for me. They said that I would make a perfect eugenicist. I would fit well in the Club of Rome if I really stuck with their organizations. And, I went up the ladder, and they would groom me for the Club of Rome. It was talked about by multiple people when I was involved, and I'm very, very glad that my conscience would not let me proceed, because when I really saw what it was about from a deeper perspective and got a peek behind the curtain, so to speak, that's when I was still able to pull back. I still had some modicum of conscience active within me, and I was able to pull back from that path in life. And then I became a whistleblower, almost as they suggested, go and tell people, go and do your worst. That's what I set out to do. I set out to be a whistleblower about what this is really about and what their worldview is really about, most of all, and how they foist that worldview off onto the people. They inculcate the people into their worldview, and that's what makes them people who are really suitable for slavery. And we can get into that later.
Wow. Okay. That's pretty intense. So they basically are feeding people into different, like there's a Club of Rome track, and then there's are there different like tracks?
I think that they tried to psychologically vet the individual and see where they would be appropriate as a tool, because that's all they're doing, is using people. People to them are tools for their agenda. And they look at what they're good at. They look at what their skill sets are. They look at what their mentality is, and they say, you'd be fit well for this position. So I'm sure some people get funneled into education. Some people get funneled into governance. Some people get funneled into eugenics ops. Some people get funneled into military operations or intelligence. It's about what your characteristics and skill sets would be well suited to move you into as a tool, as I said.
So it sounds very hierarchical. Do you know who's at the top?
Absolutely, it's hierarchical. I would say who's at the top is, again, who I call the high-level dark occultists, the real social engineers, people who run intelligence societies, people who run these multinational think tanks that we've been referencing. It's people who are really behind the scenes in the organizations of all things like that: military industrial complex, pharmaceutical complex. They're people who sit above those organizations. They don't run them from a day-to-day perspective of the physical daily activities of what needs to be done. They run them from an ideological perspective. They're the people who set the direction. just as, let's say the World Economic Forum is trying to set the direction for finance and technology. That acts like a think tank, and there are people who would direct that organization that largely are unseen. They're not in the public eye. The people who are in the public eye are the henchmen, the people who are running the day-to-day ops. They're taking marching orders from the real occultists that are above them, and those are ancient family bloodline, members that the satanic religion is their family ancestry, worldview, mindset, and belief system. And the planet has been run this way for tens of thousands of years. This is nothing new. Tyranny and slavery are ancient. This is not something that is happening now. This is something that has happened past tense. For tens of thousands of years, humanity has been a slave species.
Do you think the people at the top are conscious of what they're doing, or do you think even for them it was kind of handed down and it just became kind of a subconscious thing? I mean, I've thought about this. It's like, maybe David Rockefeller thought, well, this is, my dad, it was in this position and we have all this wealth and I'm doing good. He actually buys into the manufactured scarcity. It's just because that's how he was wired and that's how he was subconsciously programmed when he was young.
I'm sure many of them take that perspective, no doubt about it. But there are many who are very consciously in the know of what they are doing and how they are directing modern human slavery, and they want that to continue. And that is their worldview. Their worldview is, we are the gods of this planet. We are going to usurp the place of the creator that made all the laws that govern everything. And we're going to become God in a hell prison rather than, quote unquote, serve in heaven, as John Milton said in Paradise Lost. Better, their mindset is, it is better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And that's what they're trying to do on this planet. Turn it into a hellish prison and then rule it with an iron fist. And they're well on their way to doing that. Really, I would say that they have done that from a covert perspective. They're only looking to tighten their control through further social engineering and eventually come out in the open as the gods of this planet and rule it overtly. That's their long-term agenda.
So technology I always look at technology as it could be either a tool for tyranny or a tool for freedom, but it certainly seems like it's trending in the tyranny side. And it seems like, so what is I guess, I don't know if there's a way to summarize this, but like, what is the basis of the occult knowledge? What is it that we don't know fundamentally? What are the most important things that we don't know that they're kind of operating under?
Sun Tzu in The Art of War basically said there's two pieces of knowledge that will help you win any war. And we're definitely in a spiritual war. And he said you have to know yourself and you have to know your enemy. And we don't know either. We don't understand how we operate. We're wandering blind in a desert of ideology without one drop of wisdom or true philosophy, or we don't have the understanding of natural law in hand, which is the knowledge of how the universe operates and essentially gives us behavioral consequence. We have free will to choose the behaviors that we will enact, but we are not insulated from the consequences of those behaviors. That's how free will interacts with natural law. Natural law is essentially karma. It's the way that our actions interact with the laws, the moral laws of nature, the behavioral laws that are set into the universe. They're not man's laws. They're not man-made. And we don't understand how those laws work. And in addition to that, we don't really understand our enemy or their ideology, which is Satanism. We don't know what Satanism really is. When I was involved in Satanism, it's not the worship of the Christian devil. It's not the worship of some stylized deity with horns and a tail and hooves and, red skin. It's like that's religious little child's fairy tales. That has nothing to do with real world Satanism. And that's the problem, is people don't know that ideology. They don't know the ideology that runs the world, and they don't know that that's the ideology that has been handed to them, that they've been eating up with a spoon for millennia, and just they're receiving a watered down version of their master's ideology, and that makes them a piece of cake to control. So that's the answer. Is we have to know ourselves. We have to know the governing dynamics of behavior in our universe, which is natural law. There you have it. Temet noske, the Greek, know thyself. Yes. Great plaque there, by the way. That's beautiful.
My wife got me this for my birthday. So like 5 years ago. So anyway, yeah, I thought you'd like it and see that.
I would like to ask about psychopathy, because I think psychopathy is a huge part of this, that we are dealing with psychopaths. And on that score, I think Andrew Lobachevsky wrote quite a bit about this in his book, Political Ponerology.
Yes.
And this really explains basically what we're dealing with in the ruling class is a psychopath class, and we're living under pathocracy, and that is ruled by psychopaths. And so it takes some knowledge of how psychopaths operate. And what they do is they exploit normal human moral codes and normal human responses to behavior, and then they manipulate that. So I guess what I would break down, having talked with Mark before, and I'm very interested in knowing a lot more, but this is a techne. This is the kind of technology that they're operating with. And the technology is largely deep psychology, as Mark pointed out. It's a deep psychology techne, which they know how to manipulate. And they don't know how to really be normal, but they know how to act normal. They know how to act normal, and they know the kinds of things that normal people respond to emotionally and otherwise, like, say, joy or a disaster, but they don't really experience these things. They're just mimicking that behavior in order to convince you that they're normal, and then they manipulate you in turn.
Michael, I couldn't have said it any better myself. That's a practically perfect breakdown of their mindset. And that is exactly how I would describe the hierarchical system of control. It is a psychopathocracy. That's a perfect term. I often refer to the hierarchical form of control as technocratic occultocracy, because it is based in technology. And again, as Aaron very rightly said, technology is a dual-edged sword. It can be used for control. It can be used for the uplift of humanity. I love technology personally. I think it's one of the keys to getting out of this prison is we have to use it to amplify our voices and communicate and, publish what we know and teach others. It's about reaching out to others once we have learned what's going on. And we have to do that through technology. That's what will give us reach in our society. And, it's a technocratic occultocracy. It's ruled by the occult, and it's ruled by occult psychopaths. These are people with a very, very, very deeply poisonous worldview. And their worldview, as I said, is elevate the self to godhood, right? The self is all that matters. It doesn't matter what happens to anybody else. It doesn't matter what happens to anybody else's freedom, as long as we're in control, as long as we're the apex predators. And their second tenet, that's their very first tenet, the self elevated to godhood. Okay. The second tenet of their religion, of their worldview, is moral relativism. There's no such thing as right and wrong. We get to make all that up. It's not an objective standard in nature that we have to learn, that we have to try to understand and then align our behavior to it. No. We get to decide what's right and wrong. We get to arbitrate that whole thing. And we'll tell you what's right and what's wrong, and we'll write it into our laws because we want to become the authors, the authority of what's real in nature. And, not the creator of the universe. We want that to be us. And then you take that, you extrapolate that out a little bit, and they take on the worldview that includes social Darwinism. The idea that, well, since, our genetics got us here and we're in a position to rule others, that it's perfectly normal and natural for us to organize society like a pack of, vicious animals, and we'll mimic that Darwinistic worldview in the human social domain, and that'll work out really well because the humans who are willing to do the most ruthless things, as an animal at the apex of their pecking order is willing to do, those humans will come out on top, and that'll work out really well for everyone in the world. It'll be a great society. And, just extrapolate that one out to its final conclusion or final solution, as it were, and you have eugenics. You have, well, since we're the basic gods of this society and we're at the top of our pecking order as the apex predators, then we're going to decide who lives and who dies, who's allowed to propagate their genes and who's not. And that's what these long-term agenda visions are all about. They're about how are they going to conduct worldwide eugenics operations to kill who they want, leave who they want, so that they can be the work mule class for the administrator class and the ultimate ruling class above them.
Yeah, and I would like that in there about the psychopathy, is that psychopathy is genetically transmitted. So this makes sense in terms of the bloodlines that Mark's talking about, because there's a genetic component to this. So they're breeding psychopaths effectively, and then I think it can be epigenetically transferred.
Yes.
So that people learn psychopathy and then pass it along in the next generation. It's amazing how fast epigenetics can work, where you can actually produce a psychopath within a space of one generation.
Absolutely. This is known as this breakdown is known as primary psychopathy and secondary psychopathy in general medical terms. So primary they are realizing that there is some sort of a genetic component to it. I don't think it's been completely discovered exactly what causes it or triggers it. I've speculated on that in my research. That goes into a whole other area of research, which I don't know if this particular podcast will have the time or the purview for, but you can look that up in my work. And then there's secondary psychopathy, which is a learned behavior. It is about conditions that operate in our environment, and the types of information that we receive and the worldview that we develop, and that is definitely learned and transmitted culturally. And sadly, I mean, most people scientifically, they believe that there's far less than 1% of human beings are primary psychopaths. It's maybe 0.5%, maybe less than that. And unfortunately, there is such a tendency toward, again, as you said, epigenetic furtherance of a worldview. A psychopathic worldview can propagate, as you said, in under a human generation now. And sadly, some of the estimates are that 20% of our population could be borderline psychopathic. This is what they're trying to recruit. They want to recruit the people who will do harmful things to others just because they want to, or just because they're given a small reward, financially or socially, etc. And that's who they're looking to recruit into their ranks. And they've done a great job of it. They have recruited those people. You could just think about how many people in our society overall, percentage wise, would not do an immoral behavior to someone else if offered a certain amount of money. It's got to be a tremendously small amount of people. Most people, if the number is high enough, they will conduct an immoral behavior for that payoff, for that payday. And that's the only metric that anyone really needs to really gauge how moral a people are. And the ultimate law of morality, the ultimate law of nature is, as a species becomes more moral, they become more free. And as a species becomes more immoral and is willing to do immoral things to their fellow men and women for whatever, favors are promised to them, that whole species in the aggregate becomes more and more enslaved and loses their rights and freedom. That is how natural law actually works. As a matter of fact, that's the secret of all the secret societies in all of human history, is what is the dynamic that actually governs human freedom. And that's what they're trying to hide. That's one of the biggest pieces of occult knowledge that there is. And you ask people in the freedom movement, just ask them, what is the actual dynamic that governs whether a whole population of beings is free or enslaved? Almost zero will say morality, because that's the correct answer. And that's the secret of secrets of the occult. That's it right there. The law of freedom.
And the kind of morality they erect in its place, because they erect a kind of what Lobachevsky calls paramoralisms. And this is based on effectively an inversion of morality. It's an inversion scheme, but it is based on relativism underneath, because you can't invert morality unless you believe that it's completely relative to your own position. So they establish these paramoralisms or paramorality, and then they are able to make people believe that that's moral, that is actually the morality. It is unbelievable. So that they're able to take people and to twist their moral systems into something else. Which I think is, I mean, for me, this all intersects into politics, but I don't know if we want to go there. But I think there are certain states, in particular Israel, which I think is under a psychopathic dictatorship.
I would say it intersects with all religion.
Yeah,
and politics is a religion.
Yeah.
Government is a religion. The belief in authority is a religion.
Yeah.
Just the things that we look at as the cultural religions are not the only ones. This is actually the twisting of words to say it only includes this, this, and this, like, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, maybe Buddhism or Hinduism, and that's about it. And it's like there's way more religions than that. The total love of money, I would say, is a religion, beyond needing it for, resources and exchanges. Egotism is a religion. I would say science not really checked by a natural process and a true truth discovery methodology can be a religion. Some people would refer to that as scientism. So there's many, many religions, and that's exactly what they depend on. They depend on relative moral ideology. It's not about understanding that there's an objective morality in nature that's built into the fabric of reality, where that which is right for a reason, because it does not initiate harm to other sentient beings and diminish them in any way by depriving them of life, freedom, property, etc. And wrongdoings do initiate those harms. They do initiate harm against other sentient beings by taking something from them that diminishes the other being in a way that you don't have the natural right to take from them. So all forms of harm and wrongdoing are based on theft, because all rights are based on property, right? There's only really one natural law that says don't do this behavior, and it's don't steal, because every wrongdoing is based on a theft: murder, assault, rape, theft, trespass, coercion, deception.
And to bring it back into the Agenda 2030 a little bit more, one of the major thefts, or I should say heists that are underway, heists that are underway, is identity. Yes. They are in the process of basically stealing identity, and then enslaving us through identity, a digital identity, which is a broad panoply of things, and then controlling identity, and then thereby controlling people. And so, like the digital identity is a massive heist. It's a massive it's a grand larceny, really, is what it is. So that the individual is no longer owning of themselves because their identity has become the property of these people.
Absolutely. There's so many ways that they want to conduct this societal control. I mean, we could break it down. Think about the things that people generally require for life and do to sustain life and improve life, right? If you just look at those dynamics, and we could break them down, and that is what their agenda is into 2030 to 2045 and beyond. First of all life is energy. Everything requires energy in some form or another. We're going to break down energy. We're going to transmute energy. We're going to use energy. So they want the control of energy, and they're going to limit energy. That's part of these sustainability quote unquote plans, which is really plans for control and eugenics.
So
And then,
yeah. I was going to say, the whole basis of this, even the whole basis of the technocracy movement, is to move from a price-based system to an energy credit system, and that idea actually started in the 1930s. So in essence, this is how I view what's going on with CBDCs, is that they're trying to evolve to a single global digital currency that's actually backed by energy credits, and that those energy credits become the basis of the control system.
Yeah, and in the input into that is the human energy, of course. That's one of the that's a big channel that they're trying to control, is the human energy. And basically, you're going to be credited or debited based on the energy that you consume or produce. And that will be completely owned, in effect, and controlled through their through their various technologies. But I think to broaden out the idea of technology, I would argue that technology is inclusive of the things that Mark's talking about, which is it's know-how. It's a know-how to do things. And one of the know-hows is, of course, deep psychological manipulation and control. And I think that's their primary technology. The other tools that they develop are, I would say, excrescences of that.
their means to an end. Yes. Well, the alteration and control of worldview is their primary technology.
Yeah.
And that's what they want people to do. They want them to adopt their basic worldview tenets, their ideological tenets, which again is, I would argue it's already accomplished. I would say it's not a matter of who has adopted their worldview tenets. It's a matter of who hasn't. How few people have gotten out of that worldview, because Satanism, having the basic tenets of an out of control ego that essentially wants the world to work however it wants it to work instead of how it actually works. This idea that I'm God, I could invent truth, I could invent what's right and wrong. That's the ego completely out of control in the human soul. Okay. And then moral relativism is, already adopted. Most people don't really believe in an objective standard of right and wrong. Social Darwinism, most people have accepted. I would say that's the acceptance of the political system. That's the acceptance of governance. Is basically a form of social Darwinism. And most people would agree with the idea that, we need to cull the population. Look at how overcrowded it is, or look at how many useless people we have. Most people don't extend the idea of their own natural rights to everyone else. And once you take on the worldview, this satanic worldview that these rights should only really be for me, I could deal with freedom and have these rights, but other people, they're too stupid or they're too abusive. It's like you really kind of move into the area where you're going to lose your freedom for not standing up for freedom in general. And that's the worldview they've gotten most people to adopt, that, without all these controls, look at all these bad people, there'd be chaos. What do you think we have now? Perfect order in society? It already is chaos.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And so I've often said that, when people would say, what's their ultimate objective of why would they want to rid people of the planet? Why do they want to get rid of? They look at the masses, I believe, as, I think it's very biblical in the sense that they're inverting the biblical narrative. They want their idea of Eden is the control over all the resources, and their idea of the fall is your existence, basically. The fall in the Garden of Eden to them is the fall of power. It's the fall of power, and so what they want is to resume that power, and the reason that, and they want this kind of Edenic reality, which most people stand in the way of, and that's why they have to clear the population. I think also this explains a great deal of why AI is being touted here as a tool, as a massive tool, because this is a replacement technology. After all, this is the replacement of human beings. They can get rid of a lot of the executive functions of society, therefore then they can dismiss and dispense with a great deal of the human population. And this is why AI is a big part of their puzzle. It's just a tool that they have developed. And they, even people like Ray Kurzweil and, of course, Yuval Noah Harari, who actually wrote a book called Homo Deus, human God, or, they see it this way. They see it as eliminationism, really a way of eliminating the human fodder that they no longer need to carry out their functions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they really don't seem to value consciousness at all. That doesn't seem to be an equation.
Not your consciousness. No. Yeah.
No, we're just an energy system. One of the things that I've struggled with, I guess, in the last year and a half is the more I look into this, it's like, oh, I'm worried about Agenda 2030, and the more I dig into it, is we already have it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like with CBDCs. Well, we already have CBDCs. I mean, our money is printed out of thin air. The federal government issues an IOU. The Fed prints it. And use an Oracle database. Our money is 92% digital. It's already trackable. There are 13 federal programs tracking our money. And then somebody will say, well, yeah, but we're not like China. We don't have a social credit system. What do you think the tax code is? What's a 401k? What's a mortgage? What's all of these things? We just don't have a user interface. We just don't know what our score is. But all of our behaviors are already being punished and rewarded through the tax code. So for us to sit here and say, well, we're free, we're not. We're for me, it's how would you even know? Like, I think we are already enslaved. So it's hard to how do we communicate this fact? Because people always think that there's something over the horizon, and you wake up and it's like, no, you've been this way for probably your whole life. Like, that seems to me the new challenge that I'm dealing with.
Look at how many
CBDCs in particular.
Yeah, look at how many people have been deplatformed, demonetized, silenced, censored. I mean, this is another big part of their control, the control of communication and knowledge. That's why they want to put constraints on the internet and keep shutting down communication systems between people, keep shutting down people be able to move money as resources privately. That's why they hate privacy coins. That's why they hate real encryption and real privacy. That doesn't fall into their agenda. They want to control every aspect of life, energy, land, food, money and finance, people, the way they live, housing, crowd people into like 250 square foot apartments, transportation, medicine, education. And then, as we're talking about here, communication, deplatforming and silencing people. That's part of a social identity, a social credit score. It's just not overtly referred to as that and accepted as that yet in language. But as Aaron said, we basically already have it.
Yeah. They haven't printed out or made it available to you formally, but it's definitely there.
So and to me, when I look at I guess the difference between 2030 and 2045 is really kind of more on the lines of transhumanism and the complete destruction of humanity. I mean, that seems to be the big component when I look into the 2045 side of this, I guess. So what do we do here? I guess we're back to this, because I mean, I've watched a lot. I've read your book, your most recent book. I've read several of your books, Michael, and I've watched a ton of your videos, Mark, and I like what you have to say about kind of, I mean, we're not willing to sacrifice. We don't know what the problem is, but what do we do? How do we go about tackling this?
Well, I mean, it's radical decentralization, but it's very difficult to achieve because of the ubiquity and the interpenetration of even the tightest enclaves by the knowledge sector, of the knowledge sector. So because we're under digital surveillance and digital control, these enclaves are already penetrated by virtue of the digital permeation of all of our space. So it's we can carve out a modicum of control. We could, there are degrees of freedom. I know that it's often idealized as you're free or you're not, but there are different degrees, I believe, and we're fighting for a modicum. We're fighting for a beachhead in order to expand, is the way I see it.
Yeah, I would say that the steps are, we have to really heal our worldview first. I find that it's worldview that is the biggest problem. And let me put that into perspective. One of the things that I think people really have to deeply understand is what human nature really is. This is something that's probably the most hotly contested and controversial part of my work, from a perspective of how many people vitriolically disagree with my conclusions regarding this. There's been this endless debate between nature and nurture. And if you really look at the new emerging sciences in this regard, specifically new biology, which they don't even have a new scientific term for it, they simply call it new biology. You really have to understand that epigenetics plays probably the largest role in how human beings perceive reality and then subsequently behave. And that means that it's information that is the determining factor. It is not, people aren't born into the world a ravening, authoritarian. Okay, that's a learned worldview and a learned behavior. People don't come into the world just wanting to commit violence upon other people because of whatever belief that drives them to that. They don't come in with that belief. This is learned behavior, and this is experience in the world, experiences in their environment. So the idea that human nature is all bad or all good are both radically incorrect. The real true nature of the human being is simply that we are a biological being that is capable of being programmed. We have as our main characteristic of mind programmability. We can be given information fed into us, and then a worldview will develop that will be the driver of subsequent behavior. Mm-hmm. And if we understand that that's the worldview of, that's the nature of a human being, then we understand that the information that constitutes the worldview is the solution. That is what has to be changed. Our beliefs and worldview completely influence the way we behave in the world as individuals. So if the worldview changes, the subsequent behavior that we enact changes. If the worldview gets on equal grounds, on equal footing, in alignment with natural law, behaviors will be in alignment with natural law, and therefore more freedom will be cultivated in the world. Conversely, if our worldview stays satanic, if it stays in this destructive, completely egocentric, characteristics of the worldview, all of the behaviors that are going to be driven by that worldview are going to continue to be immoral and support immoral things and immoral behaviors that other people do, like government and authority. And therefore, as a society in the aggregate, we're going to go down into the path of more and more totalitarianism and slavery. So that's the thing that has to change the most, is people's worldview. What people think and believe is what is leading to the way the world is. This is the first occult principle, the very first occult tenet or worldview principle that underlays all natural laws is everything stems from mind. Everything that is manifested in our reality stems from our collective state of mind. Things that happen in our world are driven by our individual mindset in our lives, but things that happen in our world are driven by the collective mindset of the people. That, unfortunately, is satanic and immoral in the aggregate. There's no question about it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be being enslaved. See, the law dictates the input and the outcome, right? So if the world is in a state of entering total enslavement, if we're on the way to total enslavement, and I don't think anybody within the sound of our voice really listening and really paying attention with any modicum of intelligence would disagree that's the path we're on, then that means the input has to have been immoral behavior. And immoral behavior in the aggregate means, by definition, the worldview had to be immoral and satanic. And again, if you have a problem with those words because they reflect too much of biblical terms, that doesn't really matter. You can call it an egotistical worldview. You can call it a worldview of pure selfishness, a worldview based on, yeah, exactly, an imbalanced psyche. Call it whatever you want. I call it what I feel it really is, which is a satanic worldview. Okay, and that's who's running the show, are people with that mentation and ideology, right? If we change that worldview, the subsequent behavior changes, and then the manifested condition changes. That's the occult knowledge. This is what people have yet to understand, and they think they're going to change it by voting for someone, making a new monetary system, making a new technology. All the new forms of dealing with each other and new forms of technology. That's great, but really, unless the worldview is straightened out first, nothing can really be improved, because behavior is going to be the same. And I just give a very quick anecdotal example before turning it back over to you guys. But think about just the crypto sector, right? Let's talk about something we all kind of have interest in and are on pretty much the same page about. And Aaron, your presentation the other day in New Jersey, in Central Jersey, was brilliant. You said the things to the audience that I've been trying to say to my community of people for the past 7 years. You were so on point. It was absolutely astounding. I really enjoyed everything that you did there in that workshop. But think about that, what we did with crypto, right? And especially things like Bitcoin, we took the same consciousness into what was supposed to be a new emerging paradigm, right? And the same thing happened. We went in there with satanic consciousness. This was supposed to be something that it was going to be the Federal Reserve killer. It was going to be the thing that gets us away from government-controlled fiat currency, opens up people's ability to transact with each other. Everybody's their own financial institution, their own bank, and money becomes free-flowing and, free from government control. Okay, that was the idea. Did it really work out like that? No. The core coders have poor consciousness. The people who are using it have poor consciousness. The people trying to get involved with it and speculate on it have poor consciousness. And they all came in with the same consciousness. And then it turned into the same basic way of interacting, where you have new central banks set up. Those are the big exchanges like Binance, Coinbase, etc., and so forth, right? You have, instead of Goldman Sachs, you have the new exchanges, right? It's because now we're open up to a whole world of speculators with ETFs and things like that, and it's become a stock market instead of an actual currency, right? So the idea here is the consciousness never changed. If the consciousness would have changed, that technology would be working as it's supposed to. But we keep bringing degraded satanic consciousness into something that's supposed to be a new, fresh, clean paradigm. And what we see happen is the same degradation that happened in other sectors of human life. Nothing's ever going to change just because we slap a new label on something, make some new technology, invent a new platform or whatever. Nothing can ultimately change in the long term until the human mind and the way we think changes. Then we'll see real change in society. And that operates according to true occult principles.
So I want to run something by you that might seem wacky, and I've never shared this with anyone outside of my wife and a few other people. It actually even relates to this Temetnosky thing, but so I went through a process in 2019. So prior to 2019, I was an objectivist, I was an atheist. I would say I was a hardcore capitalist, whatever, and but very materialistic, and went down a completely different path. So you mentioned epigenetics. So I ended up reading a bunch of Bruce Lipton. I ended up going down a completely different track from where an objectivist atheist would have been. So Joe Dispenza I started actually attending these week-long meditation retreats and going down this whole thing. And because I really decided I just question every aspect of my life, every belief that I had, just everything. In fact, I literally left the state. I consolidated everything that I had into 2 suitcases, and I'm like, okay, whatever. And I'm just going to let go of as many beliefs as I can. And as I studied this, it relates to everything that you just said. We're programmed, right? So before we're 7, what is it? The Jesuits show me the 7-year-old, I'll show you the man, right? So from the time we're 0 to 7, we essentially have no conscious filtering. So that we're in like alpha state. So whatever goes in, that's programmed. It's literally programmed. So if your parent tells you you're horrible or, whatever, implants these beliefs, it's going to take a lot of work to recognize that programming is there, to even understand that you need to overwrite it, right? Mm-hmm. And then we have school that does indoctrination. And then, in the higher up you go, the more the indoctrination. And then we have education and everything else. So I went through this process. Dr. Joe Dispenza does these things called mind movies, but I actually really started getting into this and I started playing with different frequencies. So, basically using binaural beats and a whole variety of things. You see a kaleidoscope here. And I tried to kind of derive, and even being in the Liberty Movement as part of the Free State Project, then I started looking at cults. Then I started looking at belief systems, and I was never religious, so I didn't have to overwrite anything. And I actually kept on going back to looking at this, like, well, where did this text come from? And then you're like, well, this story was repeated here earlier. And I actually got all the way back to the Hermetic principles. That's actually what I found was the core of this. And so I created this mind movie with a couple of people. I'm not going to go through the kaleidoscope or any of the music, but the idea behind this is you come up with, you try to pair a thought with an emotion, an elevated emotion. And that this kind of, if you bang that into your subconscious, then that, you still have to do work, but that will actually overwrite whatever programming is there. And I'm going to show you guys, this might seem like it's a little bit hokey, but this is what I came up with. And this is before COVID. And then I got on a different path. So I'll read it. I'm expanding my consciousness. I'm self-healing. I am co-creating a voluntary, peaceful, caring network. I spent a lot of time trying to craft that. I'm co-creating a voluntary, peaceful, caring network that empowers individual solutions. A voluntary, peaceful, caring network that shares love and know-how. Voluntary, peaceful, caring network that fosters accountability and integrity. Voluntary, peaceful, caring network that self-learns and evolves. That grows organically. That self-sustains. And then finally is decentralized. So, so anyway, so because we talked, so all right, so changing thoughts. So okay, so how do you change thoughts? How do we? So this is what I ended up with. I don't know whether this is right or wrong or whether this is even useful. I haven't been doing this because then COVID hit, but then I kind of simplified it to just this free will, love, decentralization, and abundance, which somehow I don't even know how I did that transformation, but
I would say what you're doing there, Aaron, is internal shadow work, and you're doing it with a technological component with that imagery. And as I see, it's all based on nature. A lot of nature's processes in there, from growth to healing to you had some cymatics imagery in there. I say absolutely to all of that. All of those are great affirmations. So you're doing self-directed shadow work with a technological component with that imagery, which I think is great.
All right. Well, yeah, and actually, I thought, and I was trying to introduce this to other people. So this was a group mind movie because I'm like, well, okay, if you get a group together, because you look at organizations. I mean, even in the liberty movement, we all know, we're all sitting here right now. We know how liberty movements go, and a lot of the language in here is because I've seen how liberty movements have gone. And then when I was examining cults, I'm like, is there any way to do this without it turning into a sex cult or something that's like, way off purpose where it ends up being a control system? Like, I actually spent a lot of time researching all of this stuff, whether it's Nexium or Scientology or whatever it is, or Landmark, and trying to figure out, well, what are the common, like, how do we avoid this, what seems to be even Osho, this inevitable, end state with these things. And I don't have any answers. I other than actually before COVID, that's what I was spending all my time on. Now somehow I'm focused on CBDCs. So I don't even know if this is coherent. And I kind of apologize because this might even be off topic. But I thought maybe it was, because we talked about we've got to change thoughts, we've got to change emotions and actions. And so what's the process? This was a process that I came up with for trying to do that. But I guess I'm just I'm looking for.
I would add also, just I also came from the dark side, just another alley of the dark side, from Marxism, and for me, my worldview changed in a heartbeat. My whole gestalt shifted all at once, and it came through trauma. Frankly, I was traumatized. And this kind of forced me to think differently entirely. And it didn't change my thinking, but it made me have to change my thinking. It forced me into changing my thinking and overriding the programming that came from that worldview. And that worldview, I think, is one of the tools that of course, this is, I think, the elite, whoever I put that in quotation marks because I don't find them to be superior human beings by any stretch. They're just powerful, probably for a lot of the reasons Mark's talking about. Is that I think that the Marxism, socialism, the whole nine yards, all of this stuff is elite controlled ideology that is used to enslave. And so once I saw that, it broke wide open, and it occurred through trauma, being traumatized. I don't know if it's deep psychology, because it shakes up the very foundations of your worldview, shatters a lot of the assumptions, and gets you back to premises that are actually valid.
I think that's what it's all about. And that's self-directed healing. And that's what you did to come out of that worldview. That's what I did to come out of the satanic worldview. Aaron, you said you came from an atheistic perspective. Doing that type of shadow work, is moving toward a more holistic worldview that shows you how everything fits together, works together. And we have to cultivate a new and better way of living amongst each other if we're going to get out of this system of slavery that we're embedded in. So I would say it was absolutely appropriate. And, I think it's well done. And I'm actually going to be giving a shadow work seminar probably sometime in late 2025. And I'm going to incorporate my methods. That's one perfectly valid method as far as I can see and tell, based on what you were doing, the reason you're doing it, and the approach that you took. I have a slightly different methodology that I employ that I'm going to share with people. But it is all about really getting rid of you're filtering out the negative satanic worldview. That isn't to say you don't pay attention to what's going on around us that is negative and is working toward human enslavement. You must absolutely stay abreast of all of that stuff. But you have to do the healing of the internal trauma and the damaged psychological worldview. That is the center of everything that these people do. As long as people stay in that worldview, they'll be able to control their behavior. So once that worldview is healed, that person cannot really be controlled anymore, and that's going to be a nightmare for them.
So I think that I think we're coming to a good, well, not a good conclusion, but so then how are they using technology? It seems like it's more difficult for us to do this work. It seems as they add more of the technology, as they add CBDCs, as they add social credit systems, it becomes more difficult to do this kind of work. I mean, I feel like we're behind on this. Maybe we aren't, but it certainly seems like we're behind. And it doesn't seem like there are that many people that are doing this kind of work.
That's exactly true, because they're distracted. They have every form of mindless entertainment available to them. They have tons and tons of other types of distractions in their lives. Every waking moment is often taken by worrying about the acquisition of whatever resources they need for their basic survival needs.
Yeah.
And they don't want to make the time for it. And I'm not saying those are excuses. They're still not even valid excuses. We have to recognize the utmost importance of doing self-corrective work upon ourselves. It's not about what we want to change in the external world until we do the work to change what's going on in the internal world. And we have to make the time to do those things. But you're absolutely correct, is they're trying to distract us in every conceivable way from doing that type of work. But that work still remains of paramount importance if we're going to solve this problem.
Well, and one thing that occurs to me is they use propaganda and censorship and fear. And one thing that I try to really catch myself to make sure that I don't start doing is utilizing their tactics.
Right.
And I'm actually seeing a lot of people, even in the liberty movement, saying, well, we've got to outdo them at propaganda. We've got to, do this, this, and this. And I'll give you an example. So it's related to this Roger Ver campaign. We want to try to get him a pardon. And, and so part of the issue is he can't speak. These attorneys have told him probably not to speak, or he might even be thrown back in prison for making extrajudiciary statements. And so the DOJ speaks, they put out a press release, and then the mainstream media picks up whatever the headlines are. So then all of a sudden the Google searches are whatever the DOJ branded it. But, it occurs to me that, love and gratitude works better than fear, or at least it should. Maybe this is a hunch. I don't know if it actually works, but it seems to me that it should work. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? How do you fight, I guess more generally, not if that's the right approach, how do you fight propaganda without becoming them? How do you fight them without becoming them?
If you want to take that, Michael, I'll respond after.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just sort of going back a little bit to what you were saying about, the introduction of all these new technology. And I think that we can get under all of their technologies and techne and ideological programming and propaganda. We can get underneath of it. We can get out from under it. And I think that the way to do that is the kind of things you're talking about, what you were saying about your own self healing and what Mark's talking about. I don't think that it's we don't need to fight fire with fire. We don't want to wield the tools of Satanism to fight it. I think we want to know what's the truth and seek it, and do it through self-examination and in our relationship with others. I don't think it's not that complicated, and I don't believe that the human psyche can be, well, it can be totally hijacked, but I believe that the hijacking can be undone. If I didn't believe that, I would kill myself, frankly.
I would agree, and it can be undone. It's going to be a tremendous task. That's why I and many other occultists have referred to that as the great work, because it's not, showing up to a party and, partying our way out of this. It's really putting our nose to the grindstone and doing a tremendous amount of work. It's self-improvement, and then we have to encourage other people to do those same techniques of self-improvement. If we become moral, we become free. And the problem is people unfortunately believe that they are good people when in fact they support a lot of harmful things and a lot of evil in the world.
Yes.
And that makes them complicit with that evil, not good people. So we have to publish and communicate and spread the word and elevate our voice, amplify our voice in every conceivable way. Do it so much that they can't censor it. Do it so much that it does end runs around the censorship. Do it every day on the street. Do it every day with our family members, every day with our friends. I refer to that as what, other people who are attempting to do self-improvement have called it is petty tyranny. Petty tyranny will prevent macro tyranny. And people who hear the term petty tyranny, if they're not familiar with it, think it's a bad thing. It is not a bad thing. It simply means that you're on top of other people to do their own self-improvement work. And you don't just give them carte blanche to pass that work and pass nature's process. You get on them and say, hey, you can do better. You must do better, but don't be a person who lives in a glass house and throws stones. Make sure you've done that internal work and have done that process of self-improvement before getting on somebody else to also, improve themselves. People too often think this is just about our own work upon ourselves. This is big in the New Age movement, which is why I don't subscribe to New Ageism. Mm-hmm. It's not just about doing it ourselves. It's about doing it ourselves and then encouraging other people to do the same thing, because that's the only thing that's ever going to improve the whole world. Individuals can improve themselves, but ultimately we have to have numbers. It's not about just like one person's just going to become a very, very good and moral person and then the whole world's going to change. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
Everybody has to come together and stop this crazy thinking that totalitarianism and control can somehow lead to a good outcome for humanity. And we have to understand that real morality is the answer and real freedom is the answer. Then we're going to reach unlimited human potential and probably become a type 1 civilization and beyond, and go on to do things we can scarcely imagine. That's one potential for humanity, and I think we can possibly reach that if we share those same goals of self-improvement and the attempts to improve our fellow man and woman. Otherwise, I wouldn't say a word. I wouldn't do this kind of work if I felt that it was impossible. It's going to be a long, hard road from where we're at right now. But I still, to this very day, do think that it is possible.
I believe that it's possible too, but I'm just wondering, like tactically. So, okay, here we are. It's probably going to be us part of driving this process. What do we do? Because, and again, I look back, the problem I have with this is that a lot of these cults started out with, it even sounded like they had this intention. And then it's really easy for these things to get hijacked and infiltrated. And in fact, they're probably deliberately infiltrated by the satanic folks. Just as they're looking to recruit, they're also probably looking to disrupt. Mm-hmm. So what's that? So how do we do this? Because I saw your video. I think it was recently, Mark, the 7 reasons the freedom movement is failing.
Yes.
So and it is. I mean, there's hope. I think we all agree that there's hope, but I think we might all agree that we're not really winning right now either. So there's still hope, but we've got to transform where we are into somewhere else.
The freedom movement doesn't understand the enemy. They don't understand their ideology. They're still onto largely incorrect, quote, solutions that aren't really the solutions. They're not onto the understanding of natural law. That's the biggest problem. All of the movements and that degenerated into cults that you previously mentioned, yes, that's a big pitfall to watch out for. We don't want any cult of celebrity rising. We don't want this degenerating into a religion. Natural law is a science. It doesn't require a belief system. It is not a belief. It is simply the way something works in nature, no different than gravity or electromagnetism.
But it's the observation of that too, the observation of it and the accordance with it.
That's right. It has to be recognized, and there are ways of testing it, just like there are ways of doing other types of experiments for other scientific laws. If we really base our understanding on true moral principles, and we understand that is the dynamic upon which freedom is hinged, then the freedom movement can go on to great things. Right now, it's not doing so well. And I get on it. I mean, I really lay into people. I've been vitriolically laying into the freedom movement, in recent times, because I feel like they have a higher standard of moral responsibility. And I feel like more should be expected of them. They should be held to a higher standard, period. And I feel like it's lazy in a lot of ways. It's people who don't want to step into the responsibility that this war demands of them. And you have to you have to step into the role that nature requires of us. We may not like it. I don't, quite frankly, like doing this stuff, right? I wish I wouldn't have to do this stuff. This is not my preferred thing. I tell people all the time, I'd rather go to a pro wrestling match or do some mundane stuff. I'd rather go, go bowling.
I just want to write poetry, but
I want to do some art. I'd like to learn how to paint. I want to kick back and enjoy my life. And I feel like, I don't want this burden just dumped on my shoulders, and other people don't want to come to the fore to share that burden. This isn't for a few people to do. This is for everyone to do. And, again, once people step into that responsibility, there'd be no stopping us. The problem is they just want their comfort. I want my comfort too, but I do what's required. Right. And then maybe if we win this thing, we can have some comfort, and, and we can have comfort for the future generations of children that are to come after us. I want them to live a peaceful, comfortable life and not be enslaved. Right. Let's take our selfish focus off of ourselves and step into the role that is required of us. That would be my main message that could really turn the freedom movement around.
So kind of tactically, and I had this in my presentation, it's whether it's a technology or a product or an idea, you usually have an adoption curve. You have, innovators 2.5%, early adopters 13.5%, and then it goes to early majority. You have to do what's called crossing the chasm. So where do we find our 2.5% with this? And I say this as I'm in the Free State Project, and so I think it becomes easier for people to understand if they can see success, right? I think maybe part of the idea of geographic concentration is that part of why I came up with that Mind movie was that, as of 2019, I would say that the Free State Project was not firing on all those dimensions. In fact, some of the language in there I put in there, some of those affirmations were corrective of the movement. Not that I did anything with it. Nobody's ever seen it. It had nothing to, but I was the chair of the Free State Project for a while, and there's some stuff that's just kind of, after a while, to your point about responsibility, where I'm like, what are we doing here? Why am I dealing with? Why do these types of problems keep on coming up over and over again? And the lack of responsibility is a big one. So where do we do it? And I know we're hopping around a bit here, but I'd like to. Does this relate to what you were saying about politics, Michael? About you wanted to talk about Israel.
I mean, it does, but that's just. I think it's just a particular case of pathocracy and psychopathy running amok. It's the worst case, I think, in the world today, but I don't think it's unique in a sense that it's the only and historically the only case. It's just the one that to me is most conspicuous. And I think it's pernicious in many regards. I mean, it's we're the batteries of this slaughter. We're the batteries that the state is tapping to fuel it, and we need to find a way to unplug ourselves from that. But I don't think it's anything that unusual, except that it's just, to me, the most conspicuous case of psychopathy in the state.
Yeah, I think it shows where religiously driven mindset can bring us.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if then you combine that with the authoritarianism of government.
Yeah.
And I agree, it's one of the worst scenarios taking place right now. And it's a shame that it's from an older religious tradition that is supposed to be about God's laws. What people fail to see, like they fail to see other allegorical traditions and connections, is a chosen people is not based upon genetics or race. It's based upon behavior.
Mm-hmm.
People will find themselves in favor of the favor of the Creator when
Mm-hmm.
they behave in a moral capacity,
I
not
agree 100%.
in a genocidal capacity. So and it shows you also the abuse victim trauma cycle.
Yes, that's correct.
It's traumatized people often identify with the traumatizer and then traumatize others.
Mm-hmm.
And that also works in the inverse, where people who have been traumatized can identify as the victim and then continue to play the victim and pass the victimhood down to others. So we have to break that trauma abuse cycle. We have to break it on an individual scale, and we have to break it on a collective scale. My work talks about this a lot. And again, at some point, I'm going to give some of the very simple, down-to-earth, day-to-day techniques that we can do to do that type of self-directed healing. And I'm going to call that a shadow work seminar, to go within and really acknowledge and deal with the most self-destructive aspects of ourselves, stuff that most people will not like doing. It's very hard work. It's the deepest psychological work that really can be done, and therefore I would call it some of the deepest spiritual work that can be done. But if we don't do it, we're going to be destroyed by that shadow side as a species. And if we do it, we'll integrate that shadow side, heal it and integrate it. And again, that will enable so much potential for us as individuals and as a species, because we'll get out of this self-destructive tendency of the belief in authority and the belief in the moral legitimacy of government and the satanic mindset and worldview and this out of control egotism and psychopathy and enabling psychopaths to rule over us. We can defeat those things, but again, it's going to have to come from self-directed healing and true self-love, because only a self-loathing species will allow this to continue. We have to come into a state of true self-love, not destructive, egotistical, out of control, putting the ego up on a pedestal, but real love of the true self. And we do that type of introspective work. Nothing can control what transformative type of being comes out on the other side of that. You can't control that. You're going to emerge from that process as someone that can't be controlled by authoritarians, lunatics, psychopaths, or anyone else. We become truly sovereign individuals capable of self-governance and truly running our own lives and developing potential, again, that, as I've said before, we can scarcely imagine at this point.
Yep. Well, I think that makes sense. I wonder if there's a way to do this without having to hit serious trauma. And then what do we do about the fact that through the educational system and these other institutions, people are going through the indoctrination. So there's a whole new factory of people being put, the battle here is pretty intense, and they're churning out the other side.
They're turning them out faster than they can be reclaimed by the human race, I'm afraid. But it doesn't mean these people are irredeemable in the sense of recapture, that they can recoup their humanity through what we're talking about. I believe they can.
The mind is very plastic. It is able to be worked into multiple conditions, even within a human lifetime. It means that it is flexible, it is malleable, it's able to be reworked. That's the good news, is that most mental conditions are not permanent. Most psychological conditions are not permanent. With work, they can be reshaped and reconditioned. But there has to be that work. There has to be genuine sincerity to want to do that self-improvement. And then it is a malleable condition. Definitely.
When are you holding the seminar, Mark? Because I want to refer some people to it.
I don't want to give a firm date right now because it's going to be a huge amount of research and work to organize. It will be online. I'm not going to do it in a physical venue, so it will be taking place online. It will be a webinar. I'm looking at the end of 2025. I'll probably need about 1 year to get all of this information together in a presentable format. So approximately a year from now. Gotcha. If everything is still here and working, and I'm still here, and
what can suffering people do in the meanwhile? Sorry, Arian. I don't mean to take over your role here, but I have questions.
No, this is a discussion, so that's great.
Once again, it's looking at the ways that we contribute to the problem. So do you look at other people and say, oh, they need to be controlled? Or do you look at other people and say, they simply need to be improved? Right? That's the first mental worldview principle to operate on. Then what are you going to be a part of? Are you going to be a part of trying to say, let's get them under control? Or are you going to be a part of saying, let's help to improve them? Right? That's the fundamental worldview dichotomy right there. I would say, in the interim, before I go into all the details of what personal shadow work can entail, and I'll probably do it pretty thoroughly, right? At least from my perspective. I'll show you the techniques I use myself, because believe me, I had to do a lot of it. I had to say I was wrong about 10 billion times.
Yeah.
I just sit there with the darkest, most psychopathic aspects of myself. Because I went into a very deep, dark religion in the past, and I was fooled. I received bad information and I ran with it, and I almost became one of these psychopathic ruling class people, right? And by nature of just having a little bit of that conscience within me and a little bit of that really good information that I was able to draw on, I pulled back from that, but that was only the beginning. The pulling back was only the beginning. That was the easy part, right? Yeah. Getting out was the easy part. Doing the shadow work to change my mindset and my worldview, that was the painful part. That was the, whoa. I mean, I barely made it through that. It was difficult, not gonna lie. So in the meantime, we could just sit with the thought, how am I contributing to the negative? How can I pull back my involvement from contribution to the negative and the satanic and the controlling and the totalitarian? And there's many ways that people can do that. And it starts really with shifting your thinking from other people need to be controlled to we can help improve other people. That's what our society should be all about. Should be about self-improvement and helping others to improve themselves.
Excellent.
Yep. And actually that was where I was focused. But again, 2019, before COVID, that was actually where I was spending my time. And then, so now I'm kind of spending all of my time on defense, because I guess I got to the point where, looking at where they're going with Agenda 2030, if we don't stop them, then our ability to help people will be even more diminished. That's how I got to where I am. But I'm glad we're having this conversation, because this is bringing up a lot of stuff for me that I haven't actually thought about for 5 years.
You got to do both. I mean, we have to make people aware of what's taking place. I mean, I think we did an excellent job of that in the early part of this, and then it shifted into that, the psychological component, which I think is the most critical and important. But yeah, no doubt about it, Aaron, you have to stay with informing people as well as to what these people are up to with their nefarious goals. No question about that either.
Yeah.
Great. Well, it's going. I don't know how much time you guys have. We could go for a long time. I mean, I've really enjoyed this, and I know we could go a lot of different ways, and we could probably talk for a week. But
Well, why don't we resume at another time and come back and talk further? I mean, it's a good. We've gotten off on a very good. We've gotten into some very important areas, and I don't think we should let it go. I think we should continue. And in the
I
meanwhile,
agree. I would be in for a part two, and you guys were tremendous company, and your thought processes are right on point, gentlemen. So thank you for including me in this. I really enjoyed it.
thank you.
Thank you for coming. This was great. I guess let me see if there are any questions here. I guess Dan's got. Can we have this panel at PorcFest, please? So
We'll see.
we'll
Maybe.
see. That would be fun. All right. Well, listen, I appreciate your time. Yeah, let's schedule a follow up. But this was really. I'm sure I'm going to be thinking about this quite a bit for the next while. Let's do a follow up. And again, I very much appreciate the time.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.